Kansas City, Missouri, April 1979. The Continental Hotel stood like a weary sentinel over the city's skyline, 12 stories of brick and mortar that had seen better decades. By 1979, it was no longer the glamorous destination it had once been. Now it housed transients, drifters, and those who had fallen through the cracks of the American dream. On a cool April morning, a maintenance worker named James Coleman climbed the stairs to the roof. It was part of his routine, checking the drainage, making sure nothing had blown loose in the overnight wind. He pushed open the heavy metal door and stepped out into the gray dawn light. What he saw would haunt him for the rest of his life.
Welcome to Hidden Chronicle, where real mysteries come to life. On this channel, we explore fascinating stories of missing persons, solved cases, and unsolved investigations from around the world. Our mission is to uncover the truth, keep these stories alive, and raise awareness about the people behind them. If you enjoy real-life mysteries and true crime stories, don't forget to subscribe to Hidden Chronicle, like the video, share it with others, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps these stories reach more people. Thank you for being part of the Hidden Chronicle community, where every mystery deserves to be remembered.
A woman lay on the tar paper roof, her body partially hidden behind a large air conditioning unit. At first, Coleman thought she might be sleeping, maybe a homeless person who had found their way up here for shelter. But as he drew closer, the truth revealed itself in horrifying detail. There was blood, so much blood. Her throat had been cut. Coleman stumbled backward, his hand flying to his mouth. He ran for the door, for the stairs, for any place that wasn't here. Within minutes, the Kansas City Police Department received a call that would begin a mystery spanning nearly 5 decades. "Please come quick," Coleman told the dispatcher, his voice shaking. "There's a woman on the roof. I think she's dead." We had nothing, just a body and a killer who wouldn't talk. Detective Frank Morrison, KCPD, retired. The crime scene was chaos wrapped in confusion. Officers arrived to find the woman's body exactly as Coleman had described it, lying on her back near the air conditioning unit, her eyes staring at nothing. The wound on her throat was deep and brutal, clearly made with a sharp blade, but it was the positioning that puzzled investigators. She wasn't killed here, they realized. There wasn't enough blood at this spot. Looking up, they saw it, the fire escape ladder dangling from the 19th floor above. The hotel had 19 floors total, but the roof was on 12. That meant someone had dropped her body from 7 stories up. She had been thrown like garbage. Who was she? That question would torment investigators for decades. The crime scene evidence. In her pockets, they found almost nothing. No wallet, no identification, no keys, no purse anywhere in the vicinity. It was as if she had been erased from existence before she even died. But the forensic team, working with the limited technology of 1979, managed to gather a few precious clues. A thin leather wallet with the initials RMK stamped on it, clearly not hers, but perhaps belonging to someone she knew. A brand-name sweater from Miss K, a popular women's clothing line at the time. A gold and brown blouse, carefully chosen, as if she had dressed for something important that day. 2 rings on her fingers, 1 simple band, 1 with a small stone. These items were photographed, catalogued, and placed in evidence lockers. They were all they had. Sometimes you get a case where you know everything except the victim's name, Detective Frank Morrison would later recall. We had the opposite. We had nothing, just a body and a killer who wouldn't talk. The man they caught. Larry E. Hayes was 29 years old when police picked him up for questioning. He was a California native, drifting through the Midwest, living in room 1912 of the Continental Hotel. When detectives knocked on his door, they found him nervous, sweating, his story full of holes. Under pressure, Hayes broke. He admitted that the woman had been in his room. He admitted that she died there, but his explanation was the oldest defense in the book, self-defense. "She came at me with a knife," Hayes told investigators. "We were both high, drugs, alcohol, I don't even remember what. She pulled a blade and I just reacted. I grabbed her hand, we struggled, and somehow the knife ended up in her throat." He claimed he panicked. He claimed he didn't know what to do, so he dragged her body to the fire escape, hoisted her over the railing, and let her fall 7 stories to the roof below. The physical evidence was consistent with his story, partially. The medical examiner confirmed that the throat wound could have been made during a struggle, but the act of dumping her body like trash, that was the act of a coward, not a man in self-defense. The plea deal. Prosecutors faced a difficult choice. They had a confession, but they didn't have a victim. Without knowing who the woman was, without being able to interview her family, without understanding her life or her circumstances, building a first-degree murder case was nearly impossible. Larry Hayes took a deal. He pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and received a sentence appropriate for the times. He served his time. He got out. He went on with his life. And the woman on the roof? She went into the ground. John Doe, Jane Doe. On a rainy afternoon in 1979, a small group of county employees gathered at a potter's field on the outskirts of Kansas City. They lowered a simple pine box into the earth. A metal marker was placed at the head of the grave, stamped with case number and a single heartbreaking designation: Jane Doe, 1979. No name, no family, no mourners, just a number. Every cold case is someone's daughter, someone's mother, someone's friend. Dr. Kristen Middlebrooks, forensic anthropologist. For 47 years, the grave sat undisturbed. The file grew dusty in the police archives. The photographs faded. The detectives who worked the case retired, then grew old, then began to die. Larry Hayes himself passed away in the early 2000s, taking whatever secrets he still held to his own grave. But the case never truly died. It sat in the unidentified persons files, waiting for the day when science might catch up to mystery. The evidence locker. In a climate-controlled room at the Jackson County Medical Examiner's office, a small box sat on a metal shelf. Inside were the items recovered from Jane Doe's body in 1979. The Miss K sweater, now yellowed with age. The gold and brown blouse, carefully preserved in acid-free paper. The 2 rings, still gleaming faintly under the fluorescent lights. Small vials containing biological samples, hair, tissue, the building blocks of identity. For decades, these items were just evidence, but in the early 2020s, they became something else entirely. They became hope. The new science. In 2018, a Texas-based laboratory called Othram Inc. began pioneering a new approach to cold cases. Traditional DNA testing required relatively intact samples, but Othram's technology could work with degraded, ancient, or contaminated genetic material. They called it forensic-grade genome sequencing, a process that could build a complete DNA profile from the smallest scraps of human remains. More importantly, they combined this with genetic genealogy, the practice of taking a DNA profile and matching it against public databases to find relatives. If Jane Doe had any living family members who had submitted their DNA to sites like GEDmatch or Family Tree DNA, Othram could find them. It was science fiction made real. And in 2025, the Jackson County Medical Examiner's Office decided it was time to try. We opened that grave knowing we might find nothing, but we had to try. Medical Examiner Dr. Robert Chen. The morning of October 15, 2025 was cold and clear. A small team gathered at the Potter's Field where Jane Doe had been buried 46 years earlier. The metal marker had long since rusted, but the coordinates were still in the file. Ground-penetrating radar confirmed what they hoped. There was a coffin down there, 6 feet deep, undisturbed. The excavation was careful, methodical, respectful. When the pine box was finally exposed, it was crumbling with age. Workers gently placed it into a transfer container and drove it to the medical examiner's office. There, in a sterile laboratory, Dr. Robert Chen opened the coffin for the first time in nearly half a century. The preservation was better than we expected, Chen later recalled. Missouri soil, the clay content, it had actually protected the remains to some degree. We were able to collect viable bone samples for DNA extraction. The lab work. Those bone samples were packaged with infinite care and shipped to Othram's facility in Texas. There, Dr. Kristen Middlebrooks and her team began the painstaking work of building a genome from fragments of the past. It took months. We had to extract the DNA, clean it, amplify it, and sequence it multiple times to ensure accuracy. Every step had to be perfect because we only had one chance. This wasn't like a fresh crime scene where you can go back for more samples. This was all we had. By January 2026, they had it, a complete forensic-grade DNA profile of the woman who had died on that April night in 1979. The genealogy search. Now came the real detective work. Othram's genetic genealogists uploaded the profile to public DNA databases. They began building a family tree, looking for matches, distant cousins, second cousins once removed, anyone who shared enough DNA to indicate a relationship. The first matches were distant, very distant, but each match was a thread, and those threads began to weave together into a tapestry. By late January 2026, they had it narrowed down to a specific family line in the American South. And then, like a photograph slowly developing in darkroom chemicals, a name began to emerge. Orlene Donaldson. Born in the 1940s, raised in a small town, moved away as a young woman, lost touch with family, never heard from again. The genealogists found a living relative, a niece who had submitted her DNA to a genealogy site years earlier, curious about her family history. She had no idea that her simple act of curiosity would solve a 47-year-old mystery. The confirmation. On February 1st, 2026, Dr. Middlebrooks picked up the phone and called the Jackson County Medical Examiner's Office. "We have a name," she said. "We need a reference sample to confirm." The niece was contacted. She was stunned, emotional, overwhelmed. She had heard stories about an aunt who disappeared in the 1970s, family lore, whispered rumors that no one could confirm. Now, suddenly, that aunt had a name, a face, a story. She provided a DNA sample. It was rushed to Othram for comparison. The results came back on February 10, 2026. 99.99% match. The woman on the roof was Orlene Donaldson. For 47 years, she was just a case number. Now she has a name. Now she has a story. Now she has a family. Jackson County Prosecutor's Office statement. February 11, 2026 was a day of reckoning. The Jackson County Medical Examiner's Office held a press conference. Reporters packed the room, cameras rolling, notebooks ready. Dr. Robert Chen stepped to the podium and delivered the news that would ripple across the nation. The unidentified female homicide victim from 1979, previously known only as Jackson County Jane Doe, has been positively identified as Orlene Donaldson. Gasps, murmurs, the scratching of pens. She was identified through advanced DNA technology and genetic genealogy conducted by Othram Inc. We extend our deepest gratitude to her family for their cooperation and to the scientists who made this identification possible. Who was Orlene Donaldson? In the days that followed, the world learned about the woman behind the case number. Orlene Donaldson was born in the mid-1940s in a small southern town. She was described by those who remembered her as vibrant, adventurous, maybe a little restless. She wanted to see the world, to escape the small-town life that felt too confining. In the late 1960s or early 1970s, she left home. She traveled. She ended up in Kansas City for reasons no one would ever fully know. She was in her early 30s when she walked into the Continental Hotel and into the path of Larry Hayes. Her family had wondered about her for decades. They had searched in their own way, calling hospitals, checking police records, asking anyone who might have seen her. But in the days before the internet, before DNA databases, before nationwide missing persons registries, a missing person could simply vanish. Orlene Donaldson vanished so completely that even her death couldn't bring her back to them. Until now. The killer's legacy. Larry Hayes died years ago, taking his secrets with him. He served his time for second-degree murder, but he never faced the full weight of what he had done. Not really. He never had to look Orlene's family in the eyes. He never had to explain why he threw her body off a roof like trash. But in a strange way, the truth caught up with him anyway. His name will forever be linked to Orlene Donaldson's. His crime will be remembered not just as a statistic, but as a story of a woman who deserved better, and a justice system that took 47 years to give her even the smallest measure of peace. The family's words. Orlene's niece, now a grandmother herself, stood before the cameras a few days after the identification. Her voice was steady, but her eyes glistened. "I never met my Aunt Orlene," she said. "I only heard stories. My mother used to talk about her, about how she was so full of life, so ready for adventure. When she disappeared, my mother never stopped hoping. She died 20 years ago, still wondering what happened to her sister." She paused, collecting herself. "I wish my mother could be here today. I wish she could know that her sister has been found, that she has a name, that she will have a headstone with her real name on it, not just Jane Doe, that someone remembered her." She looked directly into the camera. To anyone out there who has a missing loved one, don't give up. The science is getting better every day. What was impossible yesterday might be possible tomorrow. Hold on to hope. Hold on to their memory. And if you can, put your DNA in those databases. You never know whose life you might help bring home. Epilogue. The Headstone. March 2026. On a sunny spring morning, a small group gathered at a cemetery in Kansas City. Not the potter's field this time, a proper cemetery, with green grass and flowering trees and the sound of birds in the air. They were there to rebury Orlene Donaldson. Her remains had been removed from the anonymous grave where she had lain for 47 years. They had been placed in a new coffin, a beautiful one, paid for by donations from people who had followed her story and wanted to help. A headstone stood at the head of the grave. It read, Orlene Donaldson, 1946-1979. Known at last. Beloved aunt, sister, daughter. Never forgotten. Orlene's niece placed a bouquet of flowers on the grave. Other relatives, some who had traveled hundreds of miles, added their own tributes. A minister spoke words of comfort. A detective who had worked the case in its final stages said a few words about the importance of never giving up. And then, slowly, the group dispersed, leaving Orlene alone in her final resting place. But not alone, really, not anonymous anymore. She had a name, she had a story, she had a family who would visit her grave and remember her. After 47 years, the woman on the roof had finally come home. Lessons from the case. What we learned. The story of Orlene Donaldson is more than just a cold case solved. It's a testament to several profound truths. 1. Justice has no expiration date. Larry Hayes may have escaped full accountability in his lifetime, but the truth still came out. The system failed Orlene in 1979, but in 2026, it finally gave her what she deserved: recognition, remembrance, and a name. 2. Technology is the new frontier of justice. Forensic-grade genome sequencing and genetic genealogy are revolutionizing cold cases. What took 47 years to solve might someday take 47 days or 47 hours. The tools exist. The only question is whether we have the will to use them. 3. Families never stop hoping. Orlene's family never gave up. They didn't know what had happened to her, but they never stopped wondering, never stopped loving her, never stopped hoping for answers. That hope, sustained across decades, is one of the most powerful forces in the human experience. 4. Every unidentified person has a story. Jane Doe, John Doe, these aren't just case numbers. They are people who lived, loved, laughed, and dreamed. They have families who miss them. They have names that deserve to be spoken. They have lives that deserve to be remembered. 5. You can help. If you have ever considered submitting your DNA to a public genealogy database, do it. You might be the key that unlocks someone else's mystery. You might be the relative who helps bring a lost soul home. It costs nothing but a swab and a few minutes of your time, and it could mean everything to a family waiting for answers. Orlene Donaldson walked into the Continental Hotel in April 1979 and never walked out. For 47 years, she was known only by the case number stamped on a metal marker in a potter's field. For 47 years, her family wondered what happened to her. For 47 years, justice was incomplete. But in the end, science caught up with mystery. In the end, love caught up with loss. In the end, Orlene Donaldson got her name back. May she rest in peace, finally known, finally remembered, finally home. And may her story inspire us all to never stop searching, never stop hoping, and never stop believing that every person deserves to be known. If you have information about a missing person or unidentified remains, please contact the National Missing and Unidentified Person System, NAMIS, at 1-855-626-7600 or visit www.namis.gov. If you would like to contribute your DNA to help solve cold cases, consider uploading to GDmatch or Family Tree DNA. You never know whose life you might help bring home.